The media fixates on hypersonic launch signatures, a kinetic liability with a calculable cost. This is a strategic misdirection. The true vector of attack has no sound, no heat signature, and its deployment cost is a rounding error. Analysts at RUSI confirmed the primary Russian counter-protocol is not launch on warning. It is systemic sensory deprivation. This involves two kill switches. First, the subsea fiber optic network carrying $10 trillion in daily financial transactions. Second, a low-orbit cascade event targeting GNSS satellites. The objective is not to defeat the Western military complex, it is to make it blind. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a global power with full kinetic capacity but zero situational awareness. A system with its trigger finger intact but its eyes gouged out. In this state, the probability of a terminal miscalculation is no longer a risk. It is a mathematical certainty. The motive is not geopolitical. It is a solvency crisis. Any state engaged in a high-cost kinetic operation faces a domestic liability equation. Forbes' analysis confirms the war represents a significant drain on Russian state capacity, creating immense internal pressure. The state is forced to allocate resources away from domestic programs to service the war, creating a mathematical certainty of public discontent. This is not a war of choice. It is a forced transaction to maintain regime stability against perceived external threats. When a state's solvency is the primary target of economic warfare, capitulation is not a variable. It is a non-option. The cost of losing the conventional conflict becomes indistinguishable from total political collapse. This transforms the strategic calculus from a standard cost-benefit analysis into a launch-on-warning protocol. Weakness in the conventional domain forces a pivot. The only logical countermove is to escalate asymmetrically, because the cost of asymmetric action is exponentially lower than the kinetic cost of attrition. This pivot is not theoretical. It is observable. Analysis from CSIS and RUSI confirms that when Russia's war economy is threatened, for instance by a Western-led reset of Venezuelan oil as cited by mahabahu.com, the response is not de-escalation. The incentive is to vector attacks against the weakest components of the opposing system. This includes the internal stability of the proxy state itself, evidenced by U.S. travel warnings for Venezuela amidst rising militia activity, and fragile commodity currencies like the Nigerian naira, which has crashed to N$1,490 per dollar on the black market. The objective is to make the management of the global system more expensive for the architects of the economic pressure. By attacking these low-cost, high-impact nodes, the target state demonstrates that the price of containing it is systemic decay. It's a solvency attack met with a solvency attack, a feedback loop where the ultimate liability is a kinetic miscalculation. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a state actor invests approximately $5 million for a single main battle tank. The asymmetric counter is a $500 FPV drone. This is not a 2-to-1 or 10-to-1 advantage. It is a 10,000-to-1 cost disparity. This is the core calculation that renders conventional asset valuation obsolete. It is the pure economics of lethality. This economic reality creates what security strategists now label the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal, system-disrupting force has evaporated. It no longer requires a nation-state's industrial base. It requires a credit card and a shipping address. A targeted state, facing a solvency crisis, does not need to build a carrier group to retaliate. It can fund 1,000 distributed, low-cost attacks with mathematical efficiency. This is the engine of asymmetric escalation. Why engage in a symmetric, high-cost battle when strategic objectives can be met by vectoring attacks against the weakest points of the global system? A fragile commodity currency like Nigeria's naira can be targeted through information warfare. Proxy militias in a failed state like Venezuela can be activated for pennies on the dollar. The economic pressure does not force capitulation. It forces innovation in low-cost lethality, creating a systemic launch-on-warning posture. This makes a kinetic miscalculation the ultimate and most probable liability. The primary error in Western strategic doctrine is the belief that a battlefield is a geographic location. It is not. The battlefield is a system, and the current protocol of economic warfare has designated the entire global financial and logistical network as a gray zone, an arena for unrestricted asymmetric attacks. The initial vector was clear: leverage a proxy asset, Venezuelan oil, to trigger a solvency crisis for the Russian war economy. The Mahabahu.com analysis confirms this blueprint. The expected outcome was Russian capitulation. The actual outcome, documented by Fox News, was the conversion of the proxy state itself into a liability, with armed militias creating a launch-on-warning environment that necessitated a U.S. evacuation order. The asset was successfully neutralized by its intended target. The second vector is purely financial. An attack on a fragile commodity currency is not a market event. It is a strategic strike. As reported by Business Post Nigeria, the Naira's systemic collapse is a textbook example. By engineering a liquidity crisis in a key African commodity producer, the rival power achieves maximum systemic disruption with zero kinetic cost. This is not a bug in the sanctions protocol. It is the mathematically guaranteed response. These are not isolated crises. They are proxy laboratories. According to RUSI assessments, stress testing social cohesion and supply chain integrity in states from South Africa to Canada provides the necessary data to refine these destabilization protocols. While the West focuses on containing a single state actor, that actor is incentivized to vector attacks against the entire system. Russian state-adjacent entities like Suns Inc., returning to pre-crisis levels, per ulpravda.ru, is the receipt. It proves the primary economic pressure has failed and has now been repurposed by the target as an accelerant for global systemic decay. The ultimate liability is the exponentially increasing probability of a kinetic miscalculation within one of these engineered gray zones. The final liability of any systemic conflict is not territory. It is miscalculation. The protocol is designated launch on warning. It is a doctrinal response to a decapitation strike, a pre-programmed retaliation triggered by the detection of incoming hostile assets. Its sole purpose is to guarantee a counterstrike before your own command structure is vaporized. This entire framework rests on a single, fragile assumption, that your sensor grid is infallible. Enter the fog of digital war. A targeted cyber attack does not need to launch a single missile. It simply has to blind the radar. It injects chaos into the data stream, creating phantom fleets or, more critically, erasing the grid entirely. The commander is now operating blind, with the clock ticking on a potential first strike. According to doctrine analyzed by CSIS, this is the new front line, the battle for data integrity in nuclear command, control, and communications. This is not a technical failure. It is a forced error. The commander is presented with a zero-sum choice. Option A. Do not launch. If the threat is real, your nation's solvency is terminated. Option B. Launch. If the threat is a digital ghost, you have initiated global kinetic exchange based on a phantom. The fear of decapitation is engineered to override the need for confirmation. This scenario is the mathematical endpoint of the current strategy. When you threaten a rival's core war economy, as detailed in reports on Venezuela's oil reset impacting Russia, you incentivize asymmetric responses. You force the target to abandon conventional escalation and vector attacks against the opponent's most brittle systemic link. The ultimate asymmetric leverage is not targeting a fragile currency like the Nigerian Naira, but targeting the enemy's decision-making cycle itself. The economic pressure is the accelerant. A kinetic miscalculation is the guaranteed result. The application of systemic economic pressure on a sovereign entity's solvency is not a negotiation tactic. It is the initiation of a launch-on-warning protocol. By leveraging a proxy asset like Venezuelan oil to threaten Russia's war economy, source number 1, Western strategists made an asymmetric response a mathematical certainty. The target is incentivized not to capitulate, but to vector attacks against the weakest points of the global order. CSIS analysis confirms the primary targets are fragile commodity currencies. The Nigerian Naira's collapse to N1,490 per dollar, source number 4, is not just a market event, it is a targeting indicator. The calibration shot will not be a kinetic event. It will be an attribution impossible systemic failure. Within the next 12 months, expect a multi-day digital blackout targeting the port infrastructure of Lagos, Nigeria. It will be reported as a server failure or grid collapse. The true function is to demonstrate the capability to sever a strategic commodity hub from the global financial system with zero kinetic cost. This is not a declaration of war, it is a proof of leverage.